Welcome to Why Is This Good, a podcast by the Naples Writers Workshop. I'm Christine and I'm here with John. Hey, John.
Hello.
All right, it's John's turn. Tell us about the story that you picked.
I picked a story by Grace Paley called A Conversation with My Father.
Had you read this one before, or did you just stumble upon it?
So I read this book by Anne Lamott called Bird by Bird. It's a book about on writing from the 90s that she wrote. It's really interesting, like her approach. I actually think you would benefit a lot. There's a lot of little things in there that I was like, this is something that I think that Christine would enjoy reading about. Like it would be inspiring, or like it matches your style of like your approach to writing, I think, in some ways. Some ways not. Just the way she approaches things, I thought that it would resonate with you.
I read What's the One, like Bird by Bird. Is that hers?
Yeah, that is
I
Bird
read
by
it.
Bird. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay. There you go.
it was great.
So I was thinking, well, I should find a story by her to bring, but I couldn't find a good story by her. But then I happened to look at the syllabus for a class that I gave a long time ago,
Oh,
a literature class. And I was like, how many of these stories have we done on the podcast? And I was just going through them. And I was like, we've done like all of these stories on the podcast, except a metamorphosis, the Kafka story, because I always thought that was too long to do for the podcast. And then the last story on that syllabus was like at the end of the semester, I did this Grace Paley story. And I was like, how did I never do this on the podcast? And
okay,
I
cool.
was thinking about bringing a Grace Paley story. And this particular story is semi-autobiographical, just like the Anne Lamott stuff and what she talks about in Bird by Bird. So it's like it all fits together. So I was like, all right, we'll do this.
Perfect.
My father is 86 years old and in bed. His heart, that bloody motor, is equally old and will not do certain jobs anymore. It still floods his head with brainy light, but it won't let his legs carry the weight of his body around the house. Despite my metaphors, this muscle failure is not due to his old heart, he says, but to a potassium shortage. Sitting on one pillow, leaning on three, he offers last-minute advice and makes a request. I would like you to write a simple story just once more, he says. The kind de Maupassant wrote, or Chekhov, the kind you used to write. Just recognizable people, and then write down what happened to them next. I say, yes, why not? That's possible. I want to please him, though I don't remember writing that way. I would like to try to tell such a story, if he means the kind that begins, there was a woman, followed by a plot, the absolute line between 2 points which I've always despised. Not for literary reasons, but because it takes all hope away. Everyone, real or invented, deserves the open destiny of life. Finally, I thought of a story that had been happening for a couple of years, right across the street. I wrote it down, then read it aloud. Pa, I said, how about this? Do you mean something like this? Once in my time there was a woman, and she had a son. They lived nicely in a small apartment in Manhattan. This boy, at about 15, became a junkie, which is not unusual in our neighborhood. In order to maintain her close friendship with him, she became a junkie too. She said it was part of the youth culture, with which she felt very much at home. After a while, for a number of reasons, the boy gave it all up and left the city and his mother in disgust. Hopeless and alone, she grieved. We all visit her. Okay, Pa, that's it, I said. An unadorned and miserable tale. But that's not what I mean, my father said. You misunderstood me on purpose. You know there's a lot more to it. You know that. You left everything out. Turgenev wouldn't do that. Chekhov wouldn't do that. There are, in fact, Russian writers you never heard of, you don't have an inkling of, as good as anyone, who can write a plain, ordinary story, who would not leave out what you have left out. I object not to facts, but to people sitting in trees, talking senselessly, voices from who knows where.
What did you like about this one?
I don't know, it's very different than her Goodbye and Good Luck and that style of story.
Yeah, I almost like when I finished it, went back and I was like, this is Grace Paley. I didn't make that up. You know what I mean? It was a lot different.
It's yeah, yeah. And that's one thing I do like that it shows like she doesn't just do one thing. She's like writes all kinds of different ways. What I actually really like about it is that it's a story about telling stories in which she tells a story, right?
Yeah.
I like that kind of like meta thing where my father asked me to write a story, so I wrote a little story and then he comments on it and I gave some feedback and I tried to rewrite it and then he's like, oh, it's a little better, but still it's not, you're not listening to me. And I just like that kind of like levels of story within story kind of stuff in the discussion of storytelling. It's that simple.
Yeah. I like how in the version that you just read, because I think there's maybe 2 or 3 versions of the story that she like writes and then shows us the reader.
I think there's two.
Is it just 2? I'm like thinking about like this last like page page, how they talk about it kind of ad nauseum, but
Oh, in their dialogue, she goes on to like kind of expand on it because he's like,
yeah,
no,
but
I
it's
want more.
not.
But it's not actually the written. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. So, like in that first version that you read, though, she's like, I know you like these sad sap stories, Dad. Like, they all end so tragically. Like, here you go. She was alone and she was really sad. And it's true that it is a sad story and it is depressing, but he wants to really feel it. Like, his criticism seems to be, we need to say how attractive this woman was so that the downfall feels bigger, right? Like, we need to have a better idea of how good things were at the start so that we can appreciate how bad things were by the end. And also, he doesn't seem to think that his daughter appreciates what he sort of identifies with in these sad stories. I don't think he's one of these people that likes to read sad stories because he likes to feel sad, but probably feels like a sort of recognition or importance or like camaraderie with people that have suffered, And he wants to like really experience that alongside them. He's like, no, I want the details. Give me the details. And she kind of seems to be like, Dad, that's not what stories are for. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't know. I don't think he's a negative Nancy. I think he just wants to be recognized for what he feels like he's been through.
That's interesting. I did not pick up on him wanting a sad story. I just thought that he thought this story was sad and that he was trying to insist it was tragic. And she was like, well, it doesn't have to be. So I guess it's not fully clear whether he's insisting it's tragic because he wants it to be tragic or he's like, you didn't do it right. It's too tragic. I wanted it to be not as tragic. And then she's trying to like smooth it out. It's like, no, maybe she winds up in a good place. I'm thinking more of the end of the story
Yeah.
than the middle. But that's an interesting feature of like I never quite got a handle on what his particular criticism was. And obviously, her character in the story also doesn't. She's like keeps trying these different things. She's no, you don't get it. You don't get it. You're not doing the thing I actually want. So like I'm sitting here like, no, tell me, what do you want? What do you want? What is she supposed to do? I do wonder if we're more familiar with some of the authors that are specifically mentioned. De Maupassant or I've read a little bit of Chekhov.
Yeah, I mean, I was like kind of confused at first reading it, like you said, what he was after, what he wanted. But I guess I assumed, given how she leaned into it in the second version, that she was trying to give him just the sad definitive arc. It ends this way. And like, it wasn't until that final conversation that they have where she's like, well, if you really want to know what I think, which I don't think you do, you've already refused my first story. I don't think that people end where the story ends. I think people can change and be better. And that still doesn't seem to satisfy him. So I guess I just kind of like assume that there was something about these writers that he's referencing that he wants to experience, like something profound in this sort of tragedy.
Yeah, I mean, there is something to tragedy as a story.
He says, like, there's this line, he's like, jokes, he said, as a writer, that's
Yeah.
your main trouble. You don't want to recognize it. Tragedy, plain tragedy, historical tragedy, no hope, the end.
Yeah. See, because she wrote the end at the end, I felt like he was responding to that. And like, he's like, no, yeah, build up the tragedy, make it more tragic. And her reaction is, oh, but it doesn't have to be fully tragic. Like, she could go on after that. But the other aspect to this is that he's 86 and dying. And so I don't remember who said this, and probably many people have said this, but somebody said every life is a tragedy because everyone dies at the end.
Right.
And so he's facing that. And so is that what he's looking for in the story? It's like, no, the ultimate end. So the end is like the most tragic end.
Yeah, and then like even when she pushes back and says this could be hopeful, he's like, "No, she's not going to get clean. She'll slide back." And then she responds, "No, she got a job. She's in the storefront working. Like things are going to get better, just not on the page right now." And he
Yeah.
says, "How long will it be? Tragedy, you too." So yeah, I think it's to your point. He's looking at this as like every life ends badly, whether or not it's in death. And for some people, he thinks that you finally reach a level that is one that you can't rise up from and then you die. He keeps using the word tragedy as if
Yeah.
this woman had everything and lost it all. And she's kind of like, no, this woman went through life, but there's still hope. Life's not over. And he's
Yeah.
like, well, it's ending for me, so that means it sucks. Like I'm ending on a bad note. I'm sick.
This is like a previous story we did, a Flannery O'Connor story, Everything That Rises Must Converge, where because you're putting two generations of family in there and their interaction with one another kind of exemplifies a generational conflict. It's like he's dealing with this kind of like end of life situation. She's dealing with middle of life situation. And then they're talking to each other, and she's also, it's her father, it's his
Yeah.
daughter. So you get to put in all of those conflicts that arise between generations and explore that.
Yeah.
This is like semi-autobiographical. Apparently, it
Yeah.
was based on a actual conversation she had with her father, in which she did not write stories for him, but like she embellished it and like built it up.
Yeah.
That is the thing that I to almost sort of preview my takeaway for this. After I read Bird by Bird, she talked a lot about thinking about your own experiences and writing about
Yeah.
things that happen in life. And like you can write fiction based on that, but it's only through experiencing life that you breathe life into fiction. So for this story, she actually had a conversation with her father, and then she inflated it. She built it up into
Right.
something else. She's like trying to find like what the story is within that. And so it's like that idea of figuring out where the disconnects are between characters and then exploring that within the fiction, right?
Yeah, and this one's fun because we get to actually see them workshop something. It's not just like a conversation. I think a lot of times, at least for me, when I'm trying to think of a way to do that, how do I show that these characters are misunderstanding each other? How do I show that they're not on the same page? It's usually like just like purely through dialogue. And here it's like, it's mostly dialogue, but they're workshopping a story together, and that part is cool.
That's pretty unique. I mean, how many stories are there where you read like a little story and then one character gives feedback and then it's rewritten and you read it again and then there's more feedback? And I mean, it's very short. It doesn't go on, but there's not a
Yeah.
lot of stories that are like that. There are some, I'm sure, out there, but
I mean, this is at least the first we've talked about.
I mean, that is relatively unique for this, but if you're going to develop an extended conversation, there are conversations of a lifetime. Like every time you talk to somebody, you eventually pick up the same conversation and you're just like rehashing this idea. It's developing over decades. This is the kind of conversation in this story that is developing over time.
Yeah.
And one way to signal that in a story like this is like she needs to write a story and then bring it back to him, and then go back and write a story and then bring it back to him. So you get to see the passage of time. It's like a device of bringing back the story. But there's other ways to do that too. It could be, this is what comes to mind just off the top of my head, but like your old mechanic father, and then the kid is like, has never done that, but he decides he's gonna restore a car. And so he keeps bringing it back to his father to get feedback on the restoration he's doing. And that could be a way to signal this kind of like extended conversation as well. So that's an interesting thing. It's not just a single conversation, but it's one that like develops over days or weeks or months. I guess one story that I can think of is that Richard Powers story, To the Measures Fall, where it was about that book. That's kind of like that, where her relationship with that book is changing over
Oh,
time.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And every time she reads it or rereads it or interacts with criticism on it, and like
Oh,
I think
I forgot
at the
about
end
that
she's in
one.
the hospital with and
Yeah.
thinking about this book. But those kinds of, I think those are really interesting ways to structure a story, is to have it be an extended conversation.
Yeah, to that point, was sort of confused how much time had passed between writing the first story and the second. Because when she does the first one, he's not happy. He's like, see what you can do this time. Okay, I said, but it's not a 5-minute job. Second attempt. And
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I wonder, like, if she went home and did this or.
And the second attempt isn't even a new paragraph. It's like, it's not a 5-minute job, period, end quote,
Yeah.
Nick, space, second attempt, colon, and then there it is. It's like, how much time passes between that period and the end of the quotation mark and the S and second attempt? Like, that could be a day, it
Yeah.
could be 3 weeks, it could be a year.
Yeah, and they seem to just kind of pick up and well, I guess what it mostly made me wonder is how much effort did she put into it and how much did she care to satisfy him, and he still by the end is treating her attempts at all of this as like sort of flippant.
Yeah, you with the jokes.
Yeah. She's like, dude, what do you want from me? I told you I don't want to do this. I told you I don't write this way. And then she has that line in there toward the end. I had promised the family to always let him have the last word when arguing.
I like that because that brings up, without saying it, brings up mortality.
Yeah, like this is the final argument. So, like, how hard do I really push this? If I really cared to have this conversation with you, Dad, I'd probably get your heart rate so high up that you'd die on the spot, right? So, like, I guess I'll just chill out, So she's also like, maybe he doesn't appreciate or understand that part of it, but her heart's not in this argument because she's going into it knowing she has to acquiesce and doesn't believe it. So she's got this attitude about it. He's like, you with the jokes. And she's like, well, yeah, this is not like a fair fight. I've decided that you get to win.
What she does between the first and the second, like the first and the second stories are basically the same story, but she blows up the second version, like, because his main critique is like, where's all the details of life? How do you
Yeah.
fill it with life. And so she does that. She adds all these details of life, but makes it a sadder story in the process, right?
Yeah, which I
Which is
think
what
is
he
what he
picks up
wanted.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think he wanted to see how good it was so that the tragedy was like more stark.
But I like that because she's reacting to him what she thinks he wants by adding details. Because a lot of their conversation between is like, tell me more about her, like, give me more
Yeah.
about this and that. And so, okay, I'll throw in all the details that paint a picture of a living person, which, as a writer, you should be able to do.
Right. I think what we'll remember about this story is the fact that it's sort of meta, right? We're talking about the art of
Stories within
storytelling
stories. Yeah.
and like the approach, and we have two people, one a writer and one a reader, arguing about like what makes a good one and what happens after the story ends on the page. And Grace Paley, or the author or whatever, the narrator, has ideas about characters, even fictionalized, living beyond the page. And she's like, life is cruel, but like there's still hope. There's always hope. So it's also like commentary on just your approach to life, not just what makes a good story, but like what you think actually happens to people and what's an opportunity for them. I think we'll sort of like remember all of this like kind of back and forth commentary, but I think too, like either way, like what I took away from it, because like we said, it was hard at first to tell what the dad really wanted out of the story, what he was really getting at. But I think she did a really good job of capturing what we just mentioned, which is that bizarre back and forth with the person that's like on his way out. She's decided like, all right, dad, she knows this man so well. This is a conversation it seems like they've had a lot, and one that she doesn't feel, I would argue, like very invested in, right? It's not just that she's told her family she won't rile him up. It's also just like, dad, I'm going into this knowing like I'm not your cup of tea when it comes to these kind of stories, but also I'm happy to try to make you happy, but we've kind of discussed this. This is not how I am. And he hasn't let go of that, right? And there's like a stubbornness about that I think maybe is like generational, or maybe it's the fact that he's a man or her father. You could remind this guy a million times, like, dad, we know we don't agree on this, but it almost doesn't matter. He's trying to get the last word in because he knows he's about to die. He's like, come on. He's like, come on, just do it for me. Just show me that you understood or whatever. And she's like, I do understand, but I don't agree. I think she's captured that whole attitude really well. He seems like a real character to me. And even though she's sort of like flat almost, she's just kind of like there letting him kind of spin out and do this thing. And she's kind of participating half-heartedly writing these versions. It seems like really believable.
Yeah, I think I can link that to my takeaway for this episode, which is, I mean, I hinted at it because I was reading that Anne Lamott book, Bird by Bird. But in this book that I have, there's an interview with Grace Paley about kind of like they talk about this story a little bit and talk about some other stuff too. And I only skimmed through it. I didn't read it. But she mentions that the neighbor situation is one she made up, although she believes that it could have been easily happening. And she did know that there were some people who did things like that. But the conversation with her father is very similar, except that she didn't write the stories for him. And so I think it's an interesting skill to develop as a writer, is to live through something and then recognize it as the seed of a story.
Yeah.
Like, this is a thing that I can turn into a story. It isn't a story yet. I have to add, I have to embellish, I need to like shape it. But there is a seed of a story here, and I can find it. I can develop it. I don't know the exact thing. I only skimmed the interview. I don't know if she went into detail. I'd probably not. But there was something that she recognizes, like, I want to develop that. And then she turned it into this. And I like that idea. I don't usually do that for my own writing. I have done that recently in the past few years, a little bit here and there. I'll take like little things and add them into stories, or little moments that it's like, there's a feeling that I get, and this is the thing that brings about that feeling in me. So if I put that into a story, will that also bring about the feeling in the reader? I've written stories like that where I'm like, let me embellish on that feeling by adding things that generate that feeling in me.
Right. I think like what you just said, that's like all I've ever hoped or tried to do with writing, is exactly what you said. To like
Yeah.
impart the feeling that I've felt hearing something and recognizing it as either literary or worthy of inclusion somewhere, but at least like wanting to recreate that feeling for a reader in a way that's like explicit in wanting to share that.
Yeah.
So what I don't like about certain writers is when they try to be clever. I know something that you don't know. I want to be like right on the same page with my reader. I want them to read something and then, imagine imagine they put the book away in front of me and they look at me and we go, isn't that good? Like, not, didn't you write that well? But isn't this feeling like that we've captured and we've articulated and put a really
Yeah.
fine point on it? Doesn't that feel real and human and like believable? And my takeaway is not going to be as articulate as that, but like, I guess what I saw, not having read what you read about how she came up with this, was just that, and you're telling me about it, so I'm piecing it together. It's just like, this is her real father. This might not be a real conversation, but like you said, there's something about it that made her want to bring it to life. I saw this and I thought, like, he's a character worth bringing to life, right? Like, I think sometimes we think our own family or even people that we sort of know are like out of bounds in a way. But if they strike you as real, and worthy of being in something, like, just use them. Like, when we talk about write what you know, it's like, write this person that you know really well, where you can envision how a conversation like this would go. And you don't have to reach very far to know that your dad would repeatedly say, jokes, with you, it's always jokes. Or like whatever it is, like this feels believable and real, and he feels like a real person. And I did what you're talking about yesterday. Like I was talking to like a friend of mine all day over text, and then like had a couple phone calls later in the night when I was like walking my dogs. And there's like all these things that people were saying to me, and I sent all these texts to myself. They were telling me stories, and like a lot of them were like sad and really messed up. And I texted myself all of these little notes, and then at the end of the day, I wrote something.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I'll send it to you and you'll be like, okay, whatever, it doesn't make sense. But like for me yesterday, like I felt like I was getting like just like sort of a barrage of like not just sad things, but this idea of like being inundated by other people's tragedies sometimes. And how do you get through that? So anyway, there's notes that I've like taken and done exactly what you're talking about, where you're like, this deserves to be articulated. This deserves to be expressed to someone else. And I, as a writer, have to do the thing where I put it together in a nice tight package, because hearing me try to ramble and articulate, it's not going to work for you. And it's not fun for me either. But if I can like really like polish it, then I can
Yeah.
make you feel what I felt 5 times yesterday, and you'll get my take on it all. And then we can afterwards bond over it.
I think that's the important distinction is if you're going to pull something from life to put in your story, like, oh, I saw somebody wearing a red sweater and funny hair, and I thought that was kind of cool. I'll write a story about that. Like, that's not a story. Having a feeling about something, watching like an interaction between tangibly human people, capturing what's tangibly human. I like that phrase. I'm going to keep using it now. If you're going to write a story, that's what it needs to capture. It doesn't need to capture like, oh, this funny thing happened at the gas station. It's what'd you feel about that thing that happened at the gas station? And then all of a sudden you might discover that, to tell the story right, to capture that feeling, I need to move it away from the gas station. It needs to happen at a fast food place because I need to bring this in and this in so that I can really build up that feeling or whatever. All right. But it's not necessarily you're going to just pull specifically this happened and I write a story. I'm going to write that as if it's a story. That's where the craft comes in. That's where the artistry comes in, is like shaping it.
Yeah.
Because you got a glimpse of the feeling in life. And as a writer, you want to capture the fullness of that feeling. And so you might have to embellish and develop and build on the situation in order to get it bigger and more fully realized.
Yeah, because also, like, at least personally with my example, like for me, I think like the fact that it was like all happening at once, I had like multiple conversations, and none of what I was like hearing from any of these people that I like later texted myself about was anything that I had articulated to them on the spot made me feel that way. I wasn't like, God, that's sad. God,
It's
that's
like
sad
the
too.
accumulation.
Yeah, it was like my own personal experience of all of it. And then like at the end of the day, like seeing that I had these notes and I was like, there's a theme here that is only real for me right now. So like what happens if I just throw all of that together and that's like the story? You know what I mean? Because I'll do the other thing that you're talking about where maybe it's something like I saw someone with a red sweater and weird hair and I'll store that away, and like you reflect on those notes later and you're like, well, first of all, the feeling wasn't there. Second of all, that's not a complete story. It's not as helpful, but I'll try to shoehorn something in if it's like really interesting or really funny or really whatever. But then I think it, like you said, it really comes down to like the idea of like certain feelings being ones that you want to impart. Those are what make it worth doing all this work. Because like you said, sometimes people will come up with something and they're like, wouldn't that make a good story? I'm like, not if you're saying it like that. I don't want you to like do all this work to engineer a moment that for you seemed important or literary. Like, oh, that'd be a good story. Instead of like, oh my God, I am dying to get this on the page because I want someone else to read it and know what this feels like, because I know they felt it too. To summarize, it sounds like our takeaways are sort of similar, right? Mine was like, this feels like a real character. So if you have like a real person in your life, like you're allowed to use them and embellish. And it sounds like for you, it's sort of similar, right? Like there's things that happen in life and with some polishing, you make it a story.
I usually do not not like giving the advice to writers of like, mind your life for stories, because most of the time, life is not filled with stories. Life is filled with just random things that happen, and
Right.
you have to make it a story. But thinking about how to make it a story is important for
Yes.
storycraft.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And it's the feelings, like you said originally, and we kind of developed. It's like finding out what the feelings are. Even if you want to grab a character out of life, like I know this really quirky guy. He lives like down by the beach and he doesn't wear shoes. You could put that in your story as the feeling he evokes
Yeah.
as being himself. And like you have to embellish him or like choose the right details of the reality that evoke the feeling he has, and then slot that into whatever the story is. And the story has to be appropriate to the story as well. It can't just be like, hey, there's this guy, and then you describe him and like that's not a story.
Right.
But if he does something and that
Yes.
in that doing of something evokes the feeling of him, that can become a good story.
Right. Well, thanks, guys. If you enjoyed this episode, consider joining our Patreon. Your support helps us keep the show running. Find out more at patreon.com/whyisthisgoodpodcast. And for industry news, writing tips, and great short fiction, join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Naples Writers Workshop. You can also subscribe to our monthly newsletter at napleswritersworkshop.com.